G'day YouTubers, Tinker O'Toole again here with another video. Today we're going to talk about chainsaw problems with your spark plug, your coil and your carburetor. So I can sort of go over the problems that I've had over the years, and sometimes they're not that easy to resolve, but I can sort of tell you how I resolve them and what checks that you can do, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So the first one, we'll just say that could be a spark plug. The second one could be that your diaphragm in your carburetor is not working properly, not pumping fuel or pumping too much. Third problem is it could be flooding carburetor. So if carburetor floods, you're going to have a lot of trouble starting the saw. And that's just can be just general hard starting in general, whether it's the choke or something else. You know, the saw revs up and dies when you pull the throttle in. It won't idle properly. It'll idle, then it will stop. Old fuel left in there, but generally that doesn't cause much problems. Your coil resistance could be out, and we'll talk about that. The other thing that can happen is your crankcase oil seals could be leaking because the carburetor relies on vacuum and pressure to move the diaphragm. So if you've got a leak in your crankcase, it cannot run properly and it can cause all sorts of problems. Your high and low setting on your saw is not adjusted properly, could be too rich, needs to be a little bit of a lean. So first of all, we'll talk about the spark plug. That's the easiest one of all. So what symptoms will your saw sort of show up if the spark plug is on its way out? Well, generally it will normally start, but you find out it will idle, but when you go to rev it, it may hesitate a little bit. It won't be responsive. The saw will just feel not responsive. And this problem can also feel like it's the carburetor. So yeah, you've got to be careful with that one, but at least with a spark plug, if you start your saw up and it just doesn't seem to be running properly, it's hesitating, it's not smooth. When you pull the throttle in quick, it doesn't really go up to the high rev range. There is a carburetor adjustment, which will go into the carburetor on the next stage, but it can be the spark plug, and it was a spark plug even a couple of weeks ago. I had exactly that same problem. Pulled the saw out, just wouldn't run properly, pulled the plug out, put the new one in, bang, off I went. So always carry a spare spark plug. Now carburetor, that's an interesting one because you've got your choke setting. Usually that doesn't go out. It's mechanical, so that's pretty good. But as I said, you've got plastic inside that carburetor, and you've got a diaphragm. And you've got crankcase seals, and they work together. So that diaphragm moves up and down as the piston travels down. It's you've got a vacuum there, and you've got pressure, and that'll make the diaphragm move up and down and pump fuel. You've also got like a little needle in there so that it actually stops fuel coming in when the little chamber fills up. And also the little chamber has a gasket that's also made out of a polymer. So you can get kits. In this particular saw here, I have changed the coil, and I did change the carburetor. It is a Bing carburetor, so it's a genuine carburetor on there. Bing 48, that's what it is. And you've got your high and low adjustment. So you've got two choices. If you change the spark plug and your saw is still running a little bit erratic, 9 times out of 10 it won't be your coil. It'll be your carburetor or your spark plug. So you've already eliminated the spark plug. The next will be the carburetor. If your saw's never done this before and it's erratic and it's not running properly, you're not getting the power, most likely it's your carburetor, or it needs a tune-up, the low and the high setting. So first of all, to eliminate the carburetor diaphragm and that, let's talk about the settings, the high and the low setting that you've got. On this MS380 saw, which is an old type saw, just over 20 years old, the procedure is that you get a screwdriver, you put the screwdriver in the two holes, the low and the high, and you close, say, the high first, and you back it off about a half a turn. You do that to the low as well. Then you start the saw, and then you pull the throttle in and out, and you're looking for responsiveness. Now, you may have to turn it anti-clockwise or clockwise. I've found most of the time I've got to turn it clockwise. Most of my settings on my saws are more towards the lean side, so that's probably about a quarter of a turn open on both, high and low. Now, if you've done that and you still feel that your saw is not running properly, it could be a carburetor, and it may be time to get a diaphragm kit in there. This particular saw that I've got here, as I say, it's an MS380. It never ever started properly from the day I got it, but it was one of my first saws that I brought, so it took about 9 pulls before it would pop. And then when it popped, then I'll take the off choke, and then it would start. When I put the new carburetor on, oh, unbelievable. Ran much better, and it would start on the third pull. This saw always gave me a little problems with flooding. So, yeah, I believe that the carburetor that was in here from the factory was a little bit off spec, and from day one, it always caused me a few problems in running and idling and dying. So if you are having those sort of problems, it may be an idea that you get yourself a kit, and they're not worth much. A diaphragm kit, you'll get all the little bits and pieces in the kit, and that should bring it back. I went out and just brought a replacement carburetor. Yeah, so that's your carburetor, without going into too much detail, because there's a lot that can go wrong with carburetors, but they're the most basic things that go wrong. The diaphragm. Now, the other thing is the coil. Now, the coil, there's two types of coils out there. The older saws used to have much higher resistance. Yeah, my coil here is I think reading about 12.5K. So they could be anywhere from 10 to 12K. That's the older saws. I don't know what year Stihl changed it, but I've got another 2 saws in the background. I'll show you those in a minute. And they're both around the 2K mark. So a lot of the newer saws have lower resistance. So there's no in between as far as I know. You either got around the 10 to 12K on your secondary winding, and that's the high tension lead, and on your primary winding you've only got about a 0.5 ohm to about 1.5 ohms. So I've got a multimeter, and we'll just come in here and set this multimeter up. Just want to make sure it's sitting there properly. And we'll zoom in so that you can see that. And this is the coil. So our primary winding is this little tab here. The wire that goes on there will be the voltage that comes out of the magneto, and this should be 0.5 to 1.5 ohms. So let's just check that. I actually changed this by mistake. There was nothing wrong with it because, again, not having the experience many years ago. So we've got 1.1 ohms. That's what we've got on that. So that's fine. The next thing that we need to check is the secondary winding. Now, the secondary winding on here, as I said, on these older saws, this is 13.2K, a little bit on the slightly high side, because normally the coils should be around anywhere from 10 to 12. So slightly higher, but nonetheless, it still works fine. So, but if that starts to go too much out of spec or too high, you'll find out that you won't generate a strong enough spark, and it can affect the performance. So on the other 2 saws, and we'll just get this MS380 out of the way. So these other 2 saws that are over here, this one here is a MS180, and it's around the 2K resistance on the secondary winding, and the other saw behind it, which is a MS311, the resistance on the secondary coil is exactly the same, around the 2K mark. Now, the other thing when I talk about carburetors, most people out there probably watching are going to have the newer saws, and if you look on the casing of the low and the high setting, you'll see that here, high and low setting here, and LA is for your idle. you've got these little black stops that are put on the where the screws are. And it generally means that you can only rotate those screws 3/4 of a turn. So the way to set them up is that you put the screw midway between the 3/4 a turn, between the stop on the left and the stop on the right. So as you rotate it to the anti-clockwise, it will stop. Visualize where it stops, rotate it to the right till it stops, then come back again and put it halfway in between those two stops. Do that on both, on the low and the high. And when you start the saw and you're going to tune it up, you'll rev it up. And if it's not responding or doesn't sound real smooth, especially on the low setting is for low RPM. So if you feel that your low RPM, it's not responding when you first pull the trigger, you may have to just tweak that slightly, close it so that it's a little bit leaner. And when the saw revs right up, if it sort of like doesn't sound like it's, it might be spluttering or it's not real smooth, try and adjust that backwards and forwards until you find the sweet spot where it sounds really nice. So your high one is really going to, actually, the more that you close it, your saw will rev up slightly higher. So just be aware of that the low one is used from low as the revs go up a bit. It's just a matter of finding the sweet spot for that. And if you find the sweet spot for both the low and the high settings, you'll find out that when you pull the trigger in, it'll accelerate up to high RPM very quick, very smooth, very crisp. So that's roughly how you tune it. It's hit and miss. There's no specific other way. You don't put meters on them or anything like that, like you're tuning a car up. It is a two-stroke motor. So, and that's how you do it. So that pretty much comes to the end of it. The only thing that I can say, sometimes a spark plug problem can feel like a carburetor problem, and a carburetor problem can feel like a spark plug problem. The spark plug is your cheapest option there, because it's only going to cost you a couple of dollars to go down your local store and get a spark plug. And you should have a spare one anyway, because you should never just, because if you're out in the field and the saw starts playing up, the first thing you do is check the spark plug. Failing that, you need to look at the carburetor. And there's no point just saying, I'm going to pull the carburetor off and clean it. If you're going to go to that extent, you might as well just go buy it and get a kit for about $20 and change all the diaphragm gaskets and everything else. And generally that will solve your problem. Coils don't normally just pack up. Coils generally give a pretty good life. Long as you're not abusing the saw and you're not overheating it, you should get very good life out of the service. And if your ohms is falling, your primary reading is falling between 1/2 ohm and 1.5 ohms, there's no problems on the primary. And on the secondary, if you've got a newer saw, it's going to be around 2.2K to about 3K. On an older saw, it'll be anywhere from 10K to 12K. So if they fall way outside those figures, then you may have an ignition problem. Also, you can tell by the spark that you get. If the spark is very weak, the only other problem that you can get with the ignition is you might find out that during manufacture there could be slightly off specification, meaning it's all a transistorized ignition system. You might integrated circuit in there. If that starts to fail, it just starts to fail, the resistance within there may be starting to change, and then you might find out the timing doesn't work properly or something else just doesn't work properly, and it starts to fail. And what happens with the wires sometimes, what can happen, especially with the secondary, is all those thin wires, and there's hundreds of turns on the secondary winding. The primary winding doesn't have as many turns, but because it's got so many turns on the secondary, and that's to boost the voltage up to at least 10 to 15,000 volts, you can find out, especially if the saw overheats, is all that copper wire is coated in varnish. And if that varnish deteriorates, you can find out that your resistance can dramatically change. Anyway, there's probably not much else I can talk about. I hope that will help those people out there that have got a problem. You can forget about looking in your user manual when it comes to resistance of your coil, because it's just not in there. There's not much information in that user manual about the specifications, other saying that it's cc's, it's kilowatts, it's chain size, it's pitch. You've got the basic information. There's very, very little technical information, as well as, oh yeah, it takes this type of spark plug. Anyway, I hope that may help somebody out there in the future that's got some problems with their chainsaw not running properly. Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up. Bye for now.